محمد بأعلى منهما.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله على محمد وعلى أهل الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم لعنا ولا ظالم حق محمد وعلى محمد وآخر تابعينه على ذلك. قل الله في كتابه الكريم في سورة الأنبياء: وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to this event marking the martyrdom of our Holy Prophet Mohammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family. Allah says in the Quran that we've not sent you except as a mercy to the world. And without getting into a lot of details about the differences in types of mercy, whether in general or specific or restricted to the believers or the Muslims or all of humanity, let's say the plainest interpretation without a lot of differentiation is to all of creation, to all of the world. It is difficult for me to talk about the Prophet because I don't know where you start and I don't know where you end talking about his accomplishments and his story are so extensive and have been so heavily documented that any kind of brief lecture is, you're not going to be able to really scratch the surface, and even if you did, a month of lectures or something like that, you're only going to get part way. And in all fairness, a lot of people wouldn't be able to put in the time to attend this. So when I was thinking about how to relate the topic of the Prophet and his martyrdom to something practically useful for believers, well, okay, maybe I'll just start with pick some piece of advice and go from there. It will not surprise any of you. The Prophet gave a lot of advice to a lot of people. So even choosing that can be a little difficult. The things that stand out the most, I think, for most people when talking about the messenger of God is the way in which he embodied the mercy of God and the way that he conveyed that in his conduct, which was always pleasant and gentle and caring. There are so many reports, in fact, about his conduct. I mean, we're talking about volumes of books, very basic things, like never being, when shaking hands, never being the first to let go of the other person's hand, or how he would rise when people entered or departed the room. There's entire sections on his fondness for brushing his teeth, and so on and so on. But I think what you see the most is manifestations of his mercy in the way he conducts himself to those around him. Not just his enemies. I mean, that's not really a lot of practical advice to draw from that, maybe right now for most of us. But with his neighbors, for instance. There's the famous story of the elderly Jewish woman who used to throw her garbage out in front of him whenever he would walk by. And then one day she didn't, and he became concerned and went to check on her because of that. So many of the narrations that involve anyone's encounter with the Prophet, where the person is skeptical or adversarial coming to Islam, ends with the Prophet doing, usually it's one very small thing, or not doing one very small thing, and the person then accepting Islam based on that sort of one very minor element that you might look over it, or not give a lot of weight to. When we talk to people here about Islam, it's worth bearing that in mind, that a lot more of those conversations have to do with how we conduct ourselves than the amount of content or education we're trying to fit into the discussion. What people will remember, what they'll reflect upon the most after that, is how they remember our conduct, and if it is a positive reflection of the religion at all. One of the narrations when someone, it's narrated by Imam al-Baqir, when someone comes and asks the Prophet for some advice, the Prophet says to him, so if you miss other people, as in if you notice their absence, then you will be missed when you're absent. As in, if you long after other people's company, other people will long after your company. And he says, and that the one who doesn't prepare or ready his patience for the difficulties or tribulations of the age, the era in which he lives, will lose out. And then he says, and if you bother people, they're going to bother you. And if you leave them still bothered, you won't be left alone. And the person says, so what do I do? And he says, loan others from your honor or your dignity for the day that you are needy. In many ways, I think this is a very fine encapsulation of his personality. It focuses on preparedness for the hardships of life, and we may say even the hardships that accompany belief, his social etiquette as well, that if you're one who misses others, you will also be missed. And that he went out of his way not to not to be a bother, not to impose difficulty on others. And was the most generous person in the history of people. His generosity was truly remarkable, actually. But this advice benefits us more in the sense that it speaks to giving of our honor and dignity to others for the day of our making. It was not a day, don't get me wrong. The Prophet, obviously, it's very clear in all reports from him, that was constantly God-fearing, aware of God, the hereafter, of paradise and perdition. One of the most amazing things, if you think about it, is the fact that he had asthma, right? He had some divine protection. This is not the way that he thought about things. He never conducted himself in a way where it seemed like he was not thinking about some negative consequence that would happen, even though there's no way it's in it. Unfortunately, belief comes with hardship. This is not just the biggest lesson in many ways of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, but also the people of the house and their descendants, is more or less one hardship after the other. We can learn from them, and they learned from their forebears, who learned from the Prophet himself, how to bear that hardship with grace and dignity. Unfortunately, the Prophet began his prophethood at sort of the worst point in history to that time, in an age, the age of ignorance of Jahiliyyah, but also an age of Jahiliyyah does not quite capture it as a term. We're talking much more like practices and ethics and morality of a level that would make the Taliban seem very lofty and noble. He had to fight against this mentality, and this mentality followed him. When he went to migrate, even then, you had people follow who were, let's say, not fully converted, were not fully convinced. And they remained there. He was surrounded at all times by people who doubted him, doubted what he was doing, suspected some kind of worldly motive of him, even though there's one really amazing narration about him walking with a number of his companions, and he stops and sees this, I think it's a sheep or lamb carcass body that's on the side of the road. And the ears are cut, and it's on a heap of dung, manure. And the Prophet says to some of his companions, "Would you buy this from me for a dinar?" And they said, "Ya Rasulullah, we wouldn't buy it from you for 0 dinars." And he said, "The world is worth even less than that to me." The thing that mattered and that you see in his conduct over and over again is that when he says the world, we're not talking about the people, we're talking about the material benefits, advantages, things like this, that status, the things that people chase after. the things that in some ways he had the most of, even though he wanted it the least. People wanted their daughters to marry him, they wanted to give sons of land, money, whatever else. But these were the things he, in some ways, was actively deriding or minimizing, running away from, trying to avoid. One of his wives would had once hung up some cloth pattern on the door, and he came in and he said, tell somebody to remove that, in a polite way, not in the way, but because it reminded him of sort of worldly material affairs. The thing that you can see that he valued the most was the people in the world. He was very concerned about them. If we can demonstrate that same concern, if we can take that lesson from him, just one lesson, maybe even one a year, one trait, one thing that stands out to us in the Prophet's conduct, and think of how we can apply that in our lives, and do that for 1 year, and then pick a second one and add that. Figure we'll be in pretty good shape. And inshallah, we'll leave a very good impression of the religion of Islam around the many non-believers that we find ourselves among now. It's not our job to convert people to Islam or bring them to the religion or anything else. God does the converting. He's the one who changes hearts. It's just our job to inform people. That's it. Just to make them aware of the subject. It's a fraction of a percent of what the Prophet did. We're not being asked to. Well, I actually would ask you, now that you've all migrated to build a religious community. I'm going to keep talking about that every time I talk to you. But I think if we can emulate some aspects of that in even the smallest way, we're moving in the right direction. How are we on time? I have 5 minutes left. I don't believe it. Oh.
Yeah, we're done talking.
Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala ahlihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ثانية لتعجيل القائم بأعلى منه. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أحسنت شيخي.